This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Romulo Lollato, K-State Wheat Production Specialist, kicks off today's show with management considerations for wheat growers who are past their optimal window to sow wheat. Continuing the show is Midway District Extension agents Craig Dinkel and Clinton Laflin, as well as K-State Watershed Specialist Stacie Minson, as they discuss agriculture in their district and an upcoming Woody Encroachment Management Field Day. K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, ends today's show with tips for safely storing leftover lawn and garden pesticides for use again next year. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show thinking about management adjustments when sowing wheat late with K-State Wheat Production Specialist Romulo Lollato. Romulo, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Shelby. Thank you for having me on air.
And Romulo, this is from a recent Agronomy E-Update article, and as we're talking about this optimal planting window, are all of the places in Kansas out of it, or are some still in that window?
Well, that's a good question, Shelby. And whenever we think about the state of Kansas, right, it's such a diverse state that we have very different planting dates depending where we are, right? So I guess the earliest planting date that we think is Northwest Kansas, right? Because such a high elevation, fall temperatures fall pretty quickly. And so, we typically think out there September 25th or so is where I'd like to be planting my crop, right? So you really have a window that probably goes there until October 5th or so as the optimal. And so we're way past our optimal in that part of the state. And the other extreme, it would be Southeast Kansas, right? Much lower elevation, higher temperatures. The crop has more time to tiller in the fall. And so, parts of South Central Kansas and Southeast Kansas, I would say we're still perhaps in the late end of the optimal window. I tend to think of the optimal there of about October 15th or something along those lines. But it is a more forgiving environment, right? Just because the temperatures don't drop as much in the fall as compared to, or as quickly in the fall as compared to Western Kansas, right? And so in that part of the state, we're perhaps still on the late end of the optimal window, but pretty quickly approaching where we will be out of that as well as we are now gearing here in the last week of the month of October.
For people outside of that optimal window, how might they want to adjust their seeding rate?
The main thing that we're considering now in terms of how the crop reacts, right, to a late planting date is it simply has less time to tiller in the fall. So it will produce less heads per plant, right? And that's in the end, when we're thinking about our grain yield, it is determined by how many heads we have per area. So we need to compensate for that pretty much. And the way we compensate for that, there's a number of different agronomic adjustments that we can talk about. But another thing that just before we jump into that I'd like to say is that this year in particular, even growers who planted the crop on time, in some cases, they may not have had the emergence on time. Right, we have had such a dry fall that many growers were actually dusting the crop in, meaning that they were not getting any emergence until they received some sort of rain, right? And so that's one thing that we were talking probably for the last couple of weeks or more. Is like, okay, well, it's very dry. We really don't have much moisture out there. So perhaps if you don't have any moisture on the forecast and you're dusting the crop in, consider that this crop is going to come up late. So already make these management adjustments if you're planting dry soils from a few weeks back, right? So hopefully growers were listening in and already did some of those adjustments, even if they already planted the crop, but they planted in dry soils that have perhaps not emerged yet, or will maybe just start to emerge now with this rain that we had this week in parts of the state. Let's talk a little bit about the different agronomic adjustments that a grower can do whenever planting wheat towards the late end of the window or even well after that optimum planting window. First thing that we think, again, we need to maximize our number of heads per area. Since the crop is not going to have the same potential to tiller, we need more seeds out there, right? We need more plants out there now since each plant is going to depend more on that single head or maybe 1 or 2 heads only instead of the normal 3, 4, 5 heads that we see per plant. So increasing seeding rates. That's the first thing that we talk about. If you haven't planted yet or if you're just now getting the drill, perhaps after harvesting a summer crop, first thing to do, consider increasing seeding rates, right? To make sure that we have the population of heads that we want in the end. Many times, a practical guidance that we have is, increasing in 10 or 15% for every week that you are late versus your optimal planting date. Historically, that has been kind of the case, and that typically results in 10 to 15 pounds per acre. Perhaps if you're in central Kansas or irrigated system, up to 20 pounds per acre for every week that you are going late. Now, there is a maximum there. So typically we say, western Kansas, up to about 100 pounds or so per acre of seed, or close to that 1 million seeds, maybe 1.2 million seeds per acre would be recommended. If you're more in central Kansas, where we typically have more rainfall, perhaps up to 120, 130 pounds of seed per acre, or close to that 1.3, 1.4 million seeds per acre would still be very acceptable. And so again, you have that maximum. We don't want to push too much further than that, but we need to be thinking about having a minimum of 1.2 million seeds out there now or more, depending where we are in the state. Another thing that we typically talk about that will increase the potential for that crop to tiller is starter fertilizer. There's a few situations where kind of stealing what my colleague down in Oklahoma State University, Brian Arnall, says, a few situations where in-furrow phosphorus is money in the bank. One of those situations is when we are planting late. Again, that little bit of phosphorus that you put in furrow, 20 to 30 pounds of phosphorus fertilizer per acre, and that can be as 1152O or 18460 or different sources, right? That really improves that early season development of the wheat crop. It also has a little bit of nitrogen fertilizer with it, those two sources that I mentioned, and the nitrogen will also help with that. So again, in-furrow fertilizer will really help the crop have quicker canopy cover development now in the fall. That's especially important when we're planting late. I mentioned 3 situations. I just talked about one, which is planting late. The other 2 is, one of them is if you're grazing the crop, which doesn't apply for late planted wheat, right? But if you're grazing the crop, phosphorus fertilizer in furrow is money in the bank. Also, if you're planting in acid soils, right? So if you're planting in acid soils, that phosphorus in furrow, it really helps alleviate some of those symptoms of aluminum toxicity. But again, we're talking now about late planting, so absolutely you will, in furrow phosphorus will be money in the bank in these situations.
And Romulo, something maybe that shouldn't be changed even if we're past that optimum planting window, planting depth?
Yes, we get that question many times, right? We go, okay, should we plant slightly shallower? Because then if we just have a little bit of rainfall, the crop can actually get a good emergence and so on. And usually we don't recommend changing planting depth because of planting time, right? And again, it comes down to, that optimum planting depth, usually 1 to 1.5 inches. Some farmers can, depending on variety, get by very well with up to 2 inches, and that's okay. But, typically 1 to 1.5 inches deep. And the reason we don't recommend changing planting depth, especially in these situations where we're planting late, is because if growers plant wheat shallower than that, let's say that they planted 0.5 inch or something along these lines, the crown of those plants will be formed very close to the soil surface. And with the crown being formed close to the soil surface, there is greater temperature changes close to the soil surface. And that soil temperature will likely go down much steeper than if that crown is formed deeper in the soil. And that can actually cause some winter kill, especially in a crop that was planted late and did not have enough time to get winter hardy before cold conditions really set. So really, in terms of planting depth, recommendation is to try and keep about the same, 1 to 1.5 inches. There, definitely do not plant any shallower than that.
Why might growers want to consider using a fungicide seed treatment?
If we're planting late, we're planting that seed in conditions of colder soils. Planting late, it will take a longer time to emerge for being colder. And planting in colder soils increases that time for germination. And so with that, there's an increased potential for some seed and soil-borne diseases that will affect the seedlings of wheat early in the season like now. And so if you know you're going to plant late, definitely planning on a fungicide seed treatment can be a good practice that to really try and protect the seed and the seedlings from that extended time that they will be subjected to seedling diseases and other things out in the field, potentially improving the stand establishment despite those late planting dates.
For producers who seem to always be planting a little bit later than they wanted to, is there things they should maybe think about when it comes to next year?
Yes, there are many decisions that are taken kind of at the cropping system level, right? And one of the things that they can do now, if they're planning already for next year, is consider their variety selection. And the reason this really impacts cropping systems is if you're planting a wheat late, it will likely be harvested later than wheat crops that have been planted on time. Right? There are chances there that everything is delayed in that crop. Through variety selection, the grower can modify a few things that are related to the cropping systems. One of them is when that crop is going to head out, right? If you're planting late, the entire cycle of that crop is delayed. If you're planting with a late maturity variety, a couple of things that happen is heading dates will be later. The crop is going to go through grain filling in likely warmer temperatures that will further reduce grain yield, and the crop will be likely harvested even later, potentially delaying or even precluding the planting of any summer crop. Now, if the grower knows that they're typically going to plant late, one option is to look for varieties with early maturity, because again, it will kind of counteract these things that I just talked about. And with that as well, that early maturity variety could help growers harvest on time. And therefore, if they're looking to plant another summer crop in sequence there, perhaps try to hit a little bit better planting date for that summer crop.
Romulo, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby. I always enjoy touching base with you here and sharing some of our information with our growers.
That was K-State Wheat Production Specialist Romulo Lollato. I will link his Agronomy E-Update article in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we'll have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show hearing from some more K-State research and extension agents as this week is annual conference in Manhattan. And today we're joined by Midway District Crop Production and Horticulture Agent Craig Dinkel, Midway District Livestock Production Agent Clinton Laflin, and K-State Watershed Specialist Stacie Minson. Craig, Clinton, Stacie, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Looking and talking about how crops have been doing, Craig, how have crops been doing in your area?
Well, I'd say the general feel is better than last year, but our biggest challenge this last year has, of course, been the weather. Still very dry. I mean, that was a common theme from the first of the year, January 1, through the spring. We were really dry for our wheat crop. We did kind of turn around there and got some moisture and had at least a little bit better of a wheat harvest, but yields were all over the board. Kind of the highly variable was the theme of wheat harvest, all the way from poor to, at least average yields. And then rolling into the fall crops, corn, sorghum, and soybeans, like you said, that theme kind of stayed. We started out good and then, hit that really dry spell through the summer. And unfortunately, a lot of the corn crop was burned up and a lot of silage happened there. But on the milo side, I think that's where we're seeing some, at least our better crops and yields is on the grain sorghum side. But there again, it just kind of seems to vary on when you planted it, where you're located. We're seeing yields all the way from, sub 50 bushel an acre all the way to over 100. And it just varies on where you're located and when you actually planted that crop, and just the timing. And then same way with soybeans, any yields anywhere from 10 bushel all the way to 40 to 50. It's just highly variable, and it just could be you're in the right area at the right time for a pop-up storm or that type of stuff.
And did you guys experience any difficulties besides just the weather this year?
Yeah, of course, insects kind of were another theme. We had big flights of fall armyworms here. They kind of showed up in September, and I'm a part of Anthony Zukoff's moth trapping network across Kansas, and I was monitoring them. They showed up early September, and even here into October, we were still seeing large flights of fall armyworms. And then also I was reached out by our row crop plant pathologist, Rodrigo Onofre, when they started finding that corn stunt disease. And I did submit a sample from Ellsworth County that came back positive on a later planted corn crop. So, and did find that corn leafhopper too in our district.
And Clinton, looking on the livestock and range side of things, what did it look like for this past year?
Yeah, really, and it was very dry for most of our producers in Midway Extension District, and so there's a lot of things that they've been kind of dealing with because of that, and so a lot of our producers are with spring calving cow herds are in the midst of weaning right now, weaning calves, and in talking to a lot of our local producers, several of them have had to wean early to try to keep body condition score of their cows at a good level and kind of keep condition and fleshing ability on those cattle. And so it's been pretty challenging for a lot of people. Some are already starting to put out hay. And so anytime you kind of link to the feeding season, it certainly adds up in terms of cost. And can have some negative impacts there, but thankfully the cattle market has really been pretty strong for the last year, and I'm kind of looking at cattle facts reports and some other things. Hopefully that will kind of stay that way through 2026. But it's been a challenge for a lot of people. Thankfully our hay prices are relatively good. We've got some supply there, but for a lot of our producers, it's been a little bit of a challenge. But it's any time we're in ag, it always seems like we've got some issue somewhere. And no year is the same regardless of kind of where we're at in agriculture, whether it be crops or livestock. So just talking to people and seeing how we can help them as an ag team within our district, kind of overcome some challenges.
And speaking of helping people in your district, you guys are putting on a How to Manage Woody Encroachment event. And Stacie, something you're helping with.
Yes, we're hosting that on November 6th, just about 4 miles west of Ellsworth and about a mile back north. You'll see the pasture where we're holding it. It's at the Robin Coles Ranch, and we're looking at different approaches on how we manage trees, brush. So we have some mechanical treatments. We'll have some equipment out there that day showing them how they can shear the trees, cut them down. Then we've done some herbicide treatments, the different types from basil to everything you can imagine. And just in the short time we've done it, the trees within a week. And then you looked at 2 weeks later, you can see some pretty big differences. And we did things so that could happen for the average farmer and rancher, that when they're out there, they get a phone call and they're busy and they thought they got both sides of the tree or all the way around it and they missed half of it. So we've got trees that show that you missed it. We also worked on the alternative water supply. There's a well with a tank. So we made sure the solar panel was up and running and we replaced the tank. Farmers and ranchers at times, their tanks have to be replaced. So we did that, and we had friends immediately when we had it up and running, Craig. You saw the horses out there, and the cattle were not quite as excited to come see us till we left. And then we'll look at the chemical side of it, as I mentioned, and then mechanical side. But we're also going to come into town and do some in-room presentations looking at water quality issues, nutrient management. We also have some acres that we put into cover crops. So even though it's been dry, as both Clinton and Craig mentioned, we have cover crops up. Now, the rains we got just yesterday, hopefully we get some more between now and November 6th. That should really pop those cover crops up. So we'll talk about the benefits of using cover crops in a livestock operation and having the alternative water supply so that they can be utilized and save that operation on having to put the hay out this early. The other thing, when we come back into town, we're going to give everyone the option on another 20 acres or 50 acres. We actually did some drone application. So we're going to see the mechanical, the chemical, and then we're going to see drone on one of the new technologies. And, we all know farmers and ranchers have some locations that you just can't get to those pastures to get that woody encroachment. So on this piece of property, Sumac, down by the Canopolis Reservoir, just loves that climate. So we can tell we'd done a spring burn. This producer had done a spring burn, didn't get everything. I guess I should say spring, July, late July type of thing. We came back in with this drone application, and the drone operator is going to be there. So we'll see what kind of interest that piques for some, just to see how it worked and if it's applicable for others.
Why is this something that you think is valuable for people in your area?
I think it's a great program because, woody encroachment is something that producers are really having to deal with, and just to keep grazable acres and everything for livestock up. And so having a good opportunity to learn how to manage these things with different philosophies and kind of help that long term is going to really, really be good, just to keep our prairie clean and kind of keep grazable acres up.
As more producers are looking into implementing cover crops, it's good to see it firsthand in your area that you're farming and ranching. And we have been very blessed in the Midway District with a lot of on-farm research that's been done with Augustino Bohr and Logan Simon. So we got a lot of good information for producers that are looking at implementing cover crops and, how they work in our growing environment.
And can we have a quick reminder about what the details are for this event?
Again, November 6th at 10 a.m. We'll start the event about 10:30 that morning. We'll go till about 2:30. We're going to provide lunch for you. And it's just about 4 miles west of Ellsworth and about a mile back north. And as Craig mentioned, Augustino Bohr, Logan Simon will be there along with Keith Harmony. So we will have a good group and NRCS personnel, Ellsworth County Conservation District. And then obviously we're looking at the water quality side, how we protect it with properly managed range, using cover crops, nutrient management. Canopolis Reservoir is, our endpoint in my watershed. So we get closer to it, doing things that help protect water quality, but also give farmers and ranchers the tools to be profitable in their operations.
Do people need to RSVP for this event?
Yes, we would appreciate it so that we make sure we have enough lunch, and especially if you have some type of dietary restriction, so we can make sure we have those options available.
How do people RSVP?
They can call 785-472-3161, extension 3. And if you see one of the flyers, there's a QR code that you'll be able to do, but you can also contact myself or the Midway Extension District and get registered as well.
That was K-State Watershed Specialist Stacie Minson, and she was joined by Midway District Extension agents Craig Dinkel and Clinton Laflin. I will put a link in today's show notes on agtoday.net where you can learn more about the event, how to manage woody encroachment. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. It's common to have a variety of unused pesticides left heading into late fall and winter. If it's not possible to use them up before they'll be needed again, they should be properly stored. K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, offers a few tips for safely storing pesticides. Greg, we're at that time of year where we're starting to put some of our things away from the lawn and garden, and something that comes to mind is pesticide and pesticide storage. What are some things we should be keeping in mind?
Yeah, so oftentimes we end up with some extra at the end of the season. It would be ideal if we just kind of ran out as the need was there, but there's some left over, and those will be good for a couple of seasons, and so we probably don't want to throw them away, and we can store them. Oftentimes, cool and dry is the conditions we're looking for many of these products, and depending on your own personal situation where that might occur, maybe a garage that's somewhat heated. We don't typically want these products to freeze, and so that may be an option. One thing I've come across recently is people may be using unused refrigerators. You don't plug them in, but they're kind of a sealed application and maybe moderating that temperature. And so maybe an unused refrigerator might be a good place to store some of these products. It's weather extremes that break these products down. And so if we can moderate that, real hot is a problem as well for some of these things. So maybe the garage isn't the best during the summertime. But any place you can utilize that you can moderate that temperature would be ideal.
We also want to make sure that these are safe.
Yeah, so the refrigerator is an idea. If you can put a lock on that, you definitely want to keep it away from children or other people that may not want to come in contact with these products. So a good place that you can lock up is beneficial for sure.
In terms of what we most often store, I'm assuming that this has a lot to do with the lawn in particular, a lot of herbicides applied there.
Yeah, herbicides are probably our most common products that we have. There may be a few insecticides and fungicides and any other type of pesticide. And so keeping them cool and dry, the label is going to give you the exact information, but sometimes implementing those are a challenge to make sure that it stays cool, dry, away from pets and animals and people. So those things we have to take control of.
I know this isn't like food, but do they have some kind of markings on the label that say best if used by?
I don't think they really do, but it'd be good for you to put the date that you purchased and used it. So, if you have something, well, I don't remember, this is 3 or 4 years old, and maybe we need to take it to like a household hazardous waste site, which is another option. If it's a product you don't think you'll ever use again, take it to a place that they can recycle it or dispose of it properly for us.
That's a good point, because a lot of times we do wonder, what should I do with this? I don't really have enough to treat the lawn, but I also want to make sure I'm getting rid of it safely.
Yes, and so hopefully your community has one of these collection sites. Sometimes they're just like the third Saturday of the month, but some have year-round facilities that you can take those to, and that would be a great resource to utilize.
What are some other things that we should keep in mind?
Use these products as the label intends, and that's really going to get your best use out of the product when you use it again, but also on how to store that so that it is usable. These products have been designed to work, and if you use them properly, they should be safe to use. Again, just read the label and make sure you understand the product before you use it.
Is this one of those instances where if it's maybe not as fresh as it should be, we might see diminished results?
There may be. That's something you may consider. Maybe if it doesn't work as well the first time, and I use another application and it gets the job done. May use it up with some help with other people. Maybe they could use some of your product and got a neighbor. They may want to use it as well. So it will diminish over time. Be kind of a little sampling. Try it in a small area before you treat the whole area that you're trying to manage.
At this time of year, what type of things could we maybe be using up?
Yeah, so we're looking at dandelion or broadleaf weed control, whether it be in the lawn or maybe in the landscape, something like that. Of course, read and follow label directions so you get the best use of that. Fertilizer doesn't necessarily fall into the pesticide realm, but again, keeping that cool and dry so it's usable until you don't need it anymore is another thing to consider. And just fertilizing the typical cool season lawn, we still have some of that to accomplish this fall.
That's K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, with tips for properly storing unused pesticides. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.